tonight.
Voters today have some options in terms of how they vote and when they vote.
With early voting already underway in a number of states, the campaign chaos isn't letting up. The latest on election 2024. Plus, the future of the nation's highest court depends heavily on who wins in November.
We're going to end up voting not just for president and vice president, but president, vice president, and 2 Supreme Court justices.
CBN News examines a proposed plan from Democrats that includes a constitutional amendment and the government dictating when and where you can spend money. Why some say advances in digital currency could bring about challenges to your personal freedom. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The countdown to Election Day is on, with both candidates taking their messages to critical swing states. In Washington, I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. From town halls to media interviews and campaign rallies, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are locked in a fierce battle for America's vote.
That's right. Vice President Harris continues her media blitz tonight, hoping to sway conservatives. In an interview with Fox News anchor Bret Baier earlier today, Donald Trump spoke to female voters in a pre-taped town hall on Fox.
We had the safest border. We had the best economy. Think of it, a combination of security and finance.
The former president will also reach out to Latino voters tonight during a pre-taped town hall with Univision. Meanwhile, Harris is trying to energize black voters. In an interview with Charlemagne the God Tuesday, Harris said she plans to boost black home ownership and grow generational wealth.
They are trying to scare people away because they know they otherwise have nothing to run on. Ask Donald Trump what his plan is for black America.
With just 20 days to go, the candidates are racing through swing states this week, both making stops in Georgia and must-win Pennsylvania.
And with that, let's bring in Jack Jenkins, national reporter with the Religion News Service. Jack, welcome. We want to talk to you about the Catholic vote tonight. This is a very important block of voters. We know it can often be a bellwether for the race. Specifically in the swing states like Pennsylvania, how do you see the Catholic vote going this time around?
So it's definitely a courted demographic. A thing to keep in mind is that the Catholic vote in the United States in some ways can kind of be a bellwether for the vote overall, in many ways because the Catholic vote has slowly become representative of the American public as it's gotten bigger and bigger. With that in mind, there was a recent poll by the National Catholic Reporter that showed that Trump was ahead of Catholics in general in the major swing states. And that does seem to track a little bit with what we saw last go round, particularly when we're talking about the Rust Belt swing states where white Catholics are particularly well represented, and Trump has historically done really well with those demographics. It is also true that he is far behind Vice President Harris when it comes to black and Hispanic Catholics who are overwhelmingly supportive of Harris and the Democrats. So in some ways, it kind of looks like a rehash of what happened in 2020. But one of the things we know about that race is that Biden was able to shave off just a small sliver of white Catholics, and that greatly assisted him and his victory back then. And it's not clear if Harris is going to be able to count on that same demographic this go round, shifting quite a little bit her direction when it comes to Election Day.
Jack, that breakdown of Catholics was a reminder that the Catholic voting bloc is not a monolith. So just a two-part question for you. What are the key issues for Catholic voters, though? And then also, there's talk that many evangelicals may stay at home this election. Is there similar talk of Catholic voters?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. When you break down this poll, again, you start finding a lot of the issues that people are concerned about. That Catholics are concerned about the American public in general, the economy, immigration, and abortion. Although, it's worth noting that when you ask those questions, people will say that they are concerned about it, but mean very different things when it comes to what they mean when they're concerned about, say, immigration. So, or abortion for that matter. I should note that actually the majority of U.S. Catholics, despite church teaching that opposes abortion, the majority of U.S. Catholics believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases, which should benefit Harris, given that she has made that a big part of her campaign. It is also true that among the listed issues that they cared about in this poll, that was on the lower end of the ones that they were super concerned about. The economy seems to be significant, as does immigration. But once again, you get very different responses depending on which Catholic you're talking to about whether that means that they would want to, have a more hardline immigration approach that Trump is putting forward, or a different posture that Harris is putting forward. So in some ways, there are signs of hope for both parties and also signs of concern, because I do think at the end of the day, we are looking at an electorate that is in the same part of the American public, which is, waiting and seeing.
All right. Jack Jenkins, national reporter with Religion News Service. Jack, thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, since the president has the power to nominate justices, every election makes an impact on the Supreme Court. And this year's vote could have an even more significant reason.
And before dropping out of the race, President Biden proposed a plan to make major changes to the court, a plan Vice President Kamala Harris also supports. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London tells us more.
Each aspect of President Biden's proposal would need wide support on both sides of Capitol Hill. And any constitutional amendment would also go to the states. While Vice President Kamala Harris has not mentioned this subject during her campaign, she did express support when the president announced his plan. A potential Harris administration would likely pursue the sweeping changes, although they face an uphill battle in Congress.
Biden's three-pronged proposal includes a constitutional amendment that prohibits blanket immunity for presidents, a direct jab at the court's July ruling that declared absolute immunity for official acts as president, affecting Donald Trump's legal issues. Second, setting 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices rather than a lifetime appointment, and a binding code of ethical conduct for justices. In a White House statement, Biden described his mission as a desire to restore trust and accountability to the American people. Since then, the plan has been met with criticism.
That would be, the most radical change and really attack on the judiciary that we've seen since at least 1937 with President Roosevelt's court packing plan.
Utah Senator Mike Lee called the plan unconstitutional and an attempt to tear down the conservative majority party.
President Biden's proposal for the Supreme Court flies in the face of the U.S. Constitution.
Both House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell predict such a proposal would be dead on arrival in Congress. Andrew Grossman, senior legal fellow at Buckeye Institute.
They're going to be very difficult to bring them through Congress.
For a closer look at what's before lawmakers, we spoke to Regent University law professor Brad Jacob about the president's first prong.
A constitutional amendment requires 2/3 of the House of Representatives, 2/3 of the Senate.
In which case Jacob sees as very unlikely.
The minority party almost always has more than 1/3 of each house. And then it would have to go to the states for ratification and get 3/4.
When it comes to presidential immunity, Biden maintains no one, neither president nor the Supreme Court, is above the law. Even without an amendment, Jacob feels certain criminal prosecutions, such as the effort to overturn the 2020 election, could go forth as planned against Donald Trump.
Especially if he doesn't win the White House and isn't able to call off the Justice Department.
In calling for term limits, Biden also proposes allowing presidents to nominate justices every 2 years for 18-year terms.
That would correct the sort of serendipity of current Supreme Court appointments, that sometimes a president in a very short time gets a bunch of appointments, and some presidents serve a relatively long time.
Jacob says a possible alternative to the 18-year term limit would be endowing justices with a senior status.
You're still a justice. You still collect your paycheck for as long as you're alive, but you become a senior status justice, which means you don't normally sit on cases.
Jacob says giving each president 2 appointments would still keep the court as a priority in presidential campaigns.
We're going to end up voting not just for president and vice president, but president, vice president, and 2 Supreme Court justices.
As for ethics, all 9 justices signed a formal code of conduct last November after public pressure and closed-door negotiations. But some Democrats criticized it over a lack of enforcement demanding congressional intervention.
For now, the future of the Biden effort to make these changes lies with the November election and a number of elements falling into place. Even if Harris wins the presidency, there would also need to be an overwhelming Democrat majority in both houses to move the needle. While that could make a binding ethics code and term limits more likely, the odds remain even slimmer for a constitutional amendment. Michelle London, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Michelle. Coming up, as Israel wages war against Hamas and Hezbollah, Ukraine unveils its plan to beat Russia. Next on Faith Nation.
Welcome back. Israel says it allowed 50 trucks carrying food, water, and other aid to enter the Gaza Strip today.
That's right. The announcement came after Washington issued a stark warning: improve the humanitarian conditions in Gaza within 30 days or potentially face restrictions of U.S. military assistance. Video released by the IDF showed trucks moving at the border between Jordan and Gaza. It's a fraction of what aid groups say is needed to help Gazan civilians. Israel is ramping up strikes on the enclave to stop a Hamas resurgence. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, IDF jets pounded suburbs near Beirut Wednesday. Lebanese officials say the strikes killed at least 21 people, including a city mayor. Israel says the Hezbollah terror group is crumbling.
Hezbollah is in very dire straits. There is no one to command, and if you find someone, until he gives an order, there is no one to carry it out. And if in the end someone does carry it out and he presses the button, either the missile is not fired or there are no means at all.
There's still no word on how Israel plans to retaliate against an October 1st ballistic missile attack from Iran. Tehran says it is unlikely that Israel will target its nuclear facilities, but also vows to retaliate against an Israeli strike.
Well, the crisis in the Middle East continues. Ukraine's president is hoping to end the war with Russia by next year. It's all part of Volodymyr Zelensky's so-called victory plan, unveiled this morning during a rare speech to Ukraine's parliament. The proposal aims to bolster Ukraine's position on the battlefield enough to force Russia to the negotiating table. It includes an immediate invitation to join NATO and would allow Ukraine to use Western-supplied weapons to strike deep inside Russia. So far, the plan has received a lukewarm response from Ukraine's allies. The Kremlin has dismissed the proposal.
With casualties in the hundreds of thousands in the Ukraine war, many of the injured bear not only physical and visible wounds, but also unseen emotional pain too. Ukrainian chaplains offer spiritual healing to those wounds. CBN contributor Chuck Holton reports on the growing demand for these caregivers of the soul.
This Ukrainian medic's GoPro camera video reveals the war's chaos. An artillery shell explodes near his car, wounding him before he can ensure his patient's safety. Despite his injuries, he persists in his mission of caring for comrades, highlighting these heroes' crucial role. Once the wounded arrive at the aid station, Army chaplains immediately comfort and pray for them.
We call them hospitaliers. They only work in hospitals, intensive care units, amputees, psychiatric clinics. And also there's narco clinics that we work with, and lots of soldiers do get addicted because of the stress PTSD that they face, and they cannot cope with it, so we need to work with them. They're struggling. Lots of them lost their families.
While medics can treat the physical injuries, emotional trauma persists. With a shortage of medics, chaplains often take on the responsibility, providing aid and healing to both soldiers and civilians. Many chaplains maintain strong personal connections to the area, which can intensify their challenges.
Lots of them have their families in occupied territory. At this moment, they cannot do anything to it. So we have problems. The chaplains I work with, they go front lines. We go all the way across the front line. In my team, we've got 2 women, both of us mothers of 5.
Christian Hickey, an American Green Beret and ex-police officer, relocated to Ukraine last year, committed to helping these chaplains.
Chaplaincy is not something that's been around at all in Ukraine. It was just officially established in 2022 after the war started. It had unofficially started in 2014. But now I sit on a board where I can actually have direct insight and give great advice on how the chaplaincy corps should work and help train those chaplains so they can go out and help soldiers who are seeking answers, who are looking for something, and this reveal Christ to them right there in the trenches.
Chaplains recognize the critical nature of their mission.
If a soldier is conscious, then we talk to them. We hold their hands. We We try to take their attention away from their wounds. Medics like us because they like to work with chaplains because we stabilize them.
This mission is so important. It's the person on the ground, Russian or Ukrainian, who are fighting each other, who are dying, and who are needing some sort of help. We want to stand in solidarity, say, hey, we love you, we're here to support you, and to give them something that's everlasting. It's not something that's internal, not something that's going to go away after we leave.
What we want to do is we want to preach the pure gospel, just like pray to them, lead them to Jesus, take their hands, and like literally pray and they accept Jesus Christ in their hearts.
The wartime horrors can affect the chaplains as deeply as the soldiers. Katerina reflects on her emotions just after hearing of a friend's death.
If you ask me to describe what war is, I'd probably use one word to describe it. It's just a waste. It's just a waste of money or resources, a waste of lives, waste of where sometimes we run out of strength. There's just a waste of a whole country, and it's absolutely pointless. Absolutely pointless. At the end, nobody wins.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Ukraine.
Up next, digital currency created by the federal government. Why critics say this developing technology could hurt your personal freedom.
Welcome back to Faith Nation. Americans appear to be less worried about job security and inflation. However, the same cannot be said about credit card debt. A new Labor Department survey found that the average perceived probability of missing a minimum debt payment over the next 3 months stands at 14.2%, the highest since the start of the pandemic. In this year's second quarter, Americans had a total credit card balance of $1.14 trillion. That's the most since tracking began back in 1999. And some financial experts fear the Federal Reserve might take greater control over Americans' financial freedom.
That threat is the creation of a government-backed digital currency. CBN's Dale Hurd explains why critics believe it's a bad move for both consumers and governments.
When asked whether a Federal Reserve or central bank digital currency might be on the horizon, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said no.
People don't need to worry about a central bank digital currency. Nothing like that is remotely close to happening anytime soon.
While Powell admits the central bank continues to work toward this currency, he realizes the obstacles to success are insurmountable. For starters, the Fed knows a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, could wreck the nation's banking industry, threaten the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, and even threaten the Fed itself. Financial expert Nick Anthony of the Cato Institute and author of the new book, Digital Currency or Digital Control, says CBDCs don't do much of anything well except spy on you and control your money.
The government shouldn't be trusted with a CBDC because they're so ripe for abuse. The government would have Americans' data by default. It would be on their servers a click away.
Digital money could be programmed solely for use towards certain purchases at certain times or with an expiration date. It could also be turned off, like how the Canadian government froze hundreds of bank accounts to stop the Canadian truckers' blockade over COVID restrictions.
Programmability has been something that many central banks and many governments have been looking into, where payments could be programmed or the money itself could be programmed.
However, Americans already have digital money, from credit and debit cards to apps like PayPal and other cryptocurrency. In addition to competing directly with those financial tools, a central bank digital currency would be able to divert funds that private banks need to survive.
If we think about the current banking system, where deposits come in and then banks use those deposits to fund loans, a CBDC poses a fundamental threat to that, where every dollar that's held as a CBDC instead of in a savings account, for example, would mean that that's $1 less that the banking system can use.
A digital dollar would also be way more than the Federal Reserve, with its 20,000 employees, could handle. The Fed would have to take on the credit risks of hundreds of millions of Americans, as well as the legal responsibilities the private banking sector currently handles. And if you've ever stood in line at a DMV, you can imagine just how badly the government could mess it all up. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's experiment with what it called Dcash was a small disaster. A single computer glitch made the currency unusable for months. And do Americans want to entrust even more of their financial information to the government, given that the Fed has been hacked several times in the past and leaked sensitive information about financial firms just last year? While there is talk of a privacy-enhanced CBDC, Anthony points out this is the same federal government that's already looking through your bank account.
The government has almost unfettered access into who you are and what you're doing, because it requires banks and other financial institutions to routinely report your financial activity.
Some argue the government will be forced to issue a CBDC to ensure the dollar remains the world's leading reserve currency. Technology, however, has nothing to do with the dollar's dominance. It's based on our rule of law, financial transparency, and capital markets. A badly managed CBDC, though, could cause other nations to ditch the dollar. This doesn't mean a digital dollar won't happen one day. Controlling people's money is, after all, the ultimate instrument of government control. But the Fed hasn't yet figured out how to make one work.
We're nowhere near recommending or let alone adopting a central bank digital currency in any form.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Finally tonight, an avid hiker in Hawaii has become known for his daring rescues.
So when Kawika Swinkson found out that 3 hunting dogs were trapped in a lava tube, he drove nearly 2 hours to help. Swinkson rappelled down the 3-foot deep tube that the dogs had fallen into while chasing a pig. After roughly 7 hours of being trapped, Swinkson spotted all the dogs alive and well.
Okay, I got all your 3 dogs on here. Pua, Steven, and what's the other one's name? What? Bella. Hey, Bella. It's okay.
You ready to get out of here, Steven? Steven has been down here. Come on, Bella. Come on, Bella, girl.
Swinkson harnessed them one by one so that they could be lifted to safety.
Come on, Bella.
Wow, that's more like a cave than a tube.
Yep.
Wow, good.
Brave soul. Thanks so much for watching.
Have a great night.